Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Game Into the Con video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with news from AMD themselves of the Next Horizon event, which is scheduled to take place during E3 2019. It will be actually on the 10th of June. Details are scarce of what the company are actually going to be debuting here, but if I had to guess, it will actually be Navi, and I feel that during Computex we're probably going to see the details of the Ryzen 3000 processors. Possibly we may see more of a demonstration at Computex. Maybe they're going to hold back actual details on the actual SKUs themselves, but that's just a guess. But I think that during the E3 presentation, the focus is going to primarily be on Navi. It'll be also curious whether we see anything from Sony or Microsoft, whether we see them appear on stage alongside AMD. After all, we saw Phil Spencer take to the stage during CES 2019. What I'm hoping for, anyway, is that we get a full rundown exactly of what Navi is going to be capable of. Possibly some internal benchmarks, maybe a list of the different SKUs, price points, and just overall for us to get a clear understanding of what AMD have been doing for all of this time with Navi. Navi, as a quick refresher, is based on the GCN architecture, but does have some fundamental changes compared to earlier iterations of GCN. For example, we see improved geometry performance and pixel pushing performance. That's what I've been told by a source, and also a couple of other people have actually mentioned that to me recently as well. Navi itself is supposed to be targeting RTX 2070 levels of performance and a price point which is going to be very compelling. I've heard around the $350 at max, but obviously AMD may decide to adjust the pricing depending on what they feel Nvidia are going to be countering with. Probably learn more about that during Computex, which is not too long into the future at all. There's been so much hype with Navi. It's going to be very difficult for AMD to completely live up to it, if I'm totally honest. But I feel that even in the worst case scenario, let's say that Navi is hot and power hungry, let's say that the rumours that we've heard are true there, but AMD cannot nail the performance targets and the price targets, I still think that the GPU is going to sell extremely well because, let's face it, people are frustrated with the current Nvidia pricing of the RTX 2070 and 2080 cards, so at the end of the day, competition is definitely good. And honestly, I suspect, and I've said this before, but I personally think that when companies such as Asus or Sapphire or whomever get hold of the cards and we start to see some really nice coolers slapped onto the PCBs, or maybe even you decide to go with water cooling, you're probably going to get the temperatures much better under control. So it's going to be interesting to see what the clock frequencies are going to be as well for Navi, whether AMD are going to be able to crank the clock speeds up compared to a Radeon 7, or whether we're going to see similar clock speeds. I think it was Jim at Adore TV said that AMD have had issues with the clock frequency of the Navi core, but then the rumours, of course, for the PlayStation 5 GPU is that it's running at like 1800 megahertz, so we're not quite sure of the actual GPU itself inside of the PlayStation 5. We do know it's Navi based, but we don't know what tweaks they've actually made to the architecture, so that could possibly explain that. And let's face it, it's also possible that the APU that we've seen actually isn't the PlayStation 5 APU, although personally I believe it's like 95% certain there is a iteration of the PS5 APU. Either way, I'm really going to be excited to see what Lisa Su actually unveils on stage. I did want to discuss, though, one sad piece of news from AMD, although it's not too surprising. AMD are stopping the development of Mantle. They're no longer going to be supporting it officially. And it's not surprising, after all. We've now got Vulkan as well as DirectX 12, so AMD to really push developers to support Mantle when it does only work for AMD GCN GPUs doesn't really make too much sense. I do have a soft spot for Mantle, though, if I'm totally honest. It was a low-level API from AMD, and it did just work on their GCN cards, and it drastically improved performance. It allowed the CPU to dispatch draw calls using a multi-threaded approach, much like we saw now with DirectX 12 and Vulkan. So the news that they're canning this is not, exactly a surprise to anyone, but it is kind of sad. And don't forget that the underlying technologies, or at least many of the underlying technologies for Mantle, are rekindled now in Vulkan. And when I was actually interviewing the guys over at the Kronos group, I'm slightly paraphrasing them here, but they basically said that they took what was great about Mantle and then they simply removed everything that was optimized for AMD, and then they rewrote that stuff so that it worked across different platforms, as well, of course, as different GPU architectures. And it's really awesome. I'm actually quite an advocate of Vulkan. I love DirectX 12 as well, but I really love Vulkan. There's also a couple of interviews on the channel for Vulkan, so you can go ahead and check those out as well. But I did want to kind of mention this piece of news because, at least to me anyway, it's got a bit of a special place in my heart. And honestly, I'm very thankful for AMD for their time in creating Mantle, because it really did help to push forward both DirectX 12 and Vulkan, because, well, obviously the code base is very similar, or at least it does have its origins from Mantle. In yesterday's video, I covered the RX 630 and RX 640, which appear to be rebrands of the 540 and 550 GPUs respectively. But after I covered this yesterday, a number of you emailed me as well as contacted me via social media that the latest Adrenaline drivers actually list these two GPUs. In fact, they do seem to share the same device IDs for their respective 500 series counterparts. So there's two different possibilities with this. The first is that AMD want to separate Polaris against Navi. So for the example, the RX 630 and RX 640 will be one set of GPUs which will be Polaris branded, but Navi would be the RX 3080 and so on that we've heard rumoured previously. The other possibilities, AMD have just decided to say screw it, we want to maintain our naming conventions right now because people are familiar with it, and therefore what we're going to do is to basically have RX 630, 640, 650, 650, 670, 680, and so on and so on. So we could presume, for example, the 680 or 690 would most likely be Navi based, whereas the lower end cards wouldn't be, they would be Polaris based. I'm not quite sure I would be comfortable with that explanation, because it would be very confusing to customers, although it wouldn't be the first time that we've seen GPU manufacturers have different architectures with the same naming scheme. NVIDIA's 700 series, for example, had both Kepler as well as a variant of Maxwell. So, it's not totally out of the left field for a company to do this, but personally speaking, I think that AMD are going to want to kind of draw the line there and kind of underscore the Polaris parts and then go with something different, but who knows. And now I want to finish the video off with some Gears of War 5 news, because the box art as well as the release date for this title may have leaked online thanks to the Taiwanese ratings board. Now I'm aware that this is not necessarily in the theme of the rest of the video, but as regular viewers may know, I'm actually a really big Gears of War fan. I don't actually play the multiplayer anymore, I just really like the storyline, and I don't know, it's just one of those titles that I love, and it definitely is one of the highlights for the Xbox, at least in my personal opinion. So as I mentioned, the box art as well as the release date may have been leaked thanks to the Taiwanese ratings board. The box art is looking to be really interesting because it shows Kate holding the Locust icon pendant that she was holding at the end of the last game, and there is as well Marcus Phoenix as well as Myra, who is the Queen of the Locust, and that would be on Kate's left. Obviously the development team have hinted that we would see a shift in focus to Kate, and I'm actually really looking forward to that. It's going to be interesting to play the game from a slightly different perspective. As for the release date, it's actually significantly earlier than what I would have thought. Apparently, it's going to be September the 10th this year. I would have thought it would have been later than that. I mean, if you had to have me throw a dart at the board, I would have probably aimed at more like November or December, but maybe Microsoft are just keen to get some exclusive titles out for the Xbox. But no, I'm not certain whether this is actually a legit leak or not. So it's possible maybe Microsoft are just wanting to get an exclusive out for the Xbox as early as possible, although once again I would have thought that it would have been released later on in the year. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you did, then you can like the video because that helps us out a ton, and you can also subscribe to the channel for a lot more content. And you can also find us down below on social media, as well as Patreon and Amazon affiliate links. Once again, don't feel you have to use Amazon affiliate links or Patreon, but if you do want to support the channel and you want to buy some new toothpicks, then by golly gosh, Amazon affiliate links don't cost you a penny more than the product, and it does help us out. But I appreciate you watching the video, and I wish you an amazing day, or evening, or whatever time it is for you. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.